The fist slamming against the mahogany table sent a shockwave through the briefing room. 52 officers jerked in their seats as Admiral Hector Bradley rose to his full 6'2" height, his face flushed crimson, finger aimed like a weapon at the small woman standing at the back of the room. "Who do you think you are?" His voice carried the weight of 30 years of command, reverberating off the steel walls of the USS Theodore Roosevelt's main briefing theater. Some junior analyst with a fancy degree thinks she can tell me, someone who's commanded carrier strike groups before she was out of diapers, that my tactical assessment is wrong? Ivy Whitmore stood motionless, eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the Admiral's left shoulder. Her civilian analyst uniform hung loose on her 5'3" frame, the fabric seeming to swallow her slight build. Behind her, several junior officers exchanged smirks. "Daddy's little girl playing at military service," Bradley continued, his voice dripping with contempt as he descended from the podium, each step deliberate and heavy. "Which senator did your family call? Which congressman owes your father a favor to get you this cushy analyst position?" Ivy said nothing. Her hands remained relaxed at her sides, but something in her stance, the way her weight distributed evenly across both feet, the slight blade of her shoulders, caught Master Chief Jasper Kane's attention. The 30-year submarine veteran sat in the front row, his weathered eyes narrowing. In 3 decades of service, he'd learned to recognize the difference between civilians playing dress-up and something else entirely. "Commander Nash," Bradley barked, turning to his would-be executive officer. Derek Nash was a wall of muscle at 6'1", with the swagger of someone who'd never been truly challenged. "Escort this young woman out of this secured area immediately." Nash grinned, the expression predatory. "With pleasure, Admiral." But as Nash approached, crossing the space between them with heavy footfalls, Ivy's left foot shifted that half an inch backward. The movement was tiny, automatic, unconscious. Weight transferring to the balls of her feet, body angling into a combat-ready position. Bladed stance, perfect balance, forward pressure. Master Chief Kane's fingers tightened on his armrest. Bradley raised one hand, his voice dropping to a temperature that could frost steel. "Ivy Whitmore, effective immediately. Your access to all classified materials and secured spaces aboard this vessel is revoked. You will be confined to holding pending verification of your credentials and background." He paused, letting the silence stretch like a blade. "And if I discover you've falsified any documentation to gain access to this carrier, court-martial will be the least of your problems." The threat hung in the recycled air of the briefing room. 52 pairs of eyes watched the small analyst who dared challenge an admiral. Most held satisfaction, some held pity, none held understanding. Ivy remained silent. Her breathing stayed even, controlled, measured at precisely 14 breaths per minute. But in the next 20 minutes, everything aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt would change in ways none of these officers could imagine, because what they were about to discover would shake the entire 7th Fleet to its foundation. Nash's meaty hand clamped around Ivy's upper arm, his grip deliberately tight enough to leave marks. "Let's go, Princess. Time to see where we keep the liars." As he pulled her toward the exit, Ivy moved with him without resistance, her steps matching his precisely. Not stumbling, not fighting, but flowing like water redirecting around an obstacle. Lieutenant Commander Charlotte Pierce, senior intelligence officer, and Ivy's supposed supervisor, stood near the doorway. Her perfectly pressed uniform and Ivy League credentials made her the kind of officer who believed rank and education equaled competence. "Nepotism, baby, finally gets exposed," Charlotte stage whispered to the officer beside her, her voice carrying exactly far enough for Ivy to hear. "I knew those assessments were too sophisticated for someone with her supposed background." The words were calculated cruelty, the kind that draws blood without leaving visible wounds. Several officers chuckled. Nash's grip tightened fractionally. Ivy's expression never changed. The walk through the carrier's passages drew stares from every direction. The USS Theodore Roosevelt housed over 5,000 personnel, and word traveled faster than electricity through the ship's communication systems. By the time Nash marched Ivy across the mess deck, where 200 enlisted crew sat at metal tables with their evening meal, whispers had already started circulating. "That's the analyst who pissed off the Admiral. Heard she claimed his tactical plan was garbage. Daddy probably bought her degree. Can't believe they let civilians with no real experience evaluate our operations." The mockery followed them like a wake. At one table near the serving line, 19-year-old seaman recruit Lily Morgan watched the procession with different eyes. She noticed how the analyst walked, shoulders back, head high, no shame in her bearing despite the humiliation. Lily's own hands, wrapped around her napkin, had unconsciously folded the fabric into a tight triangle, the precise military style she'd been trying to master. The analyst's napkin, Lily realized, had been folded exactly the same way at the morning briefing. Commander Owen Hayes, the carrier's executive officer, stood as Ivy passed his table. "Admiral, perhaps we should conduct a proper review before—" "You're dismissed, Commander," Bradley cut him off, the words sharp as a blade. "Unless you'd like to join her in questioning your chain of command." Hayes's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. In a hierarchy as rigid as naval command, there were battles you couldn't win with words. He sat back down, but his eyes followed Ivy's progress across the mess deck, and the frown on his weathered face suggested calculations running beneath the surface. The brig was located deep in the carrier's belly, a small collection of holding cells typically used for drunk sailors or minor infractions. Chief Petty Officer Raymond Cole waited at the entrance, a smirk already playing across his features. He was Bradley's creature through and through, the kind of senior enlisted man who had perfected the art of petty cruelty disguised as proper procedure. "Welcome to your new accommodations, Princess," Cole drawled, as Nash shoved Ivy through the doorway. The cell was 8 feet by 6 feet, containing a steel bunk, a toilet, and nothing else. "Hope Daddy's donations included 5-star hotel experience, because this is about as good as it gets for fraud cases." Nash released Ivy's arm with a final squeeze, hard enough to make most people wince. Ivy simply stepped forward into the cell, turned, and sat on the bunk with perfect posture, hands resting loosely on her knees. Her eyes remained fixed on the middle distance, revealing nothing. "Not even going to beg?" Nash leaned against the bars, his bulk blocking most of the dim light from the corridor. No tears, no phone call to Daddy's lawyer friends. Silence. "Stuck-up little—" Nash caught himself, aware that Cole was documenting everything. "Enjoy your stay. Admiral wants a complete background investigation, and something tells me we're going to find all sorts of interesting inconsistencies." The cell door clanged shut with the finality of judgment. Nash and Cole's footsteps echoed away down the corridor, their laughter trailing behind them like smoke. Alone, Ivy allowed herself one full breath. In through her nose for a count of 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Then her eyes began moving in a pattern that would have alarmed anyone trained to recognize it. 3 seconds. That's all it took for her to catalog every exit point, identify structural weak points in the cell bars, note the camera angle in the corner, 42 degrees, blind spot near the door, and inventory 7 improvised weapons within reach, including the steel bunk frame, toilet tank lid, and the belt Cole had forgotten to confiscate. Old habits died hard, especially when they had been carved into your nervous system through 12 years of training that most people would call impossible. The way Admiral Bradley humiliated Ivy in front of the entire command staff should make anyone's blood boil. But here's what you need to understand. This story is about to take a turn that will leave you speechless. If you think you've seen this kind of revenge story before, trust me, you haven't. What happens in the next 15 minutes will rewrite everything you thought you knew about quiet professionals. Hit that like button if you're ready to see arrogance get absolutely demolished. 2 hours later, Charlotte Pierce arrived with her clipboard, her heels clicking against the metal floor with the rhythm of someone who had practiced making an entrance. She wore her authority like armor, the kind of officer who had never been deployed to actual combat but had mastered the bureaucratic battlefield. "I'm here to verify your credentials," she announced, flipping through papers with theatrical precision. "Let's start with the basics, shall we? Your GPA from Georgetown? 3.9. International Relations." Ivy's voice was quiet, almost monotone. Charlotte's smile sharpened. "Impressive number. Tell me, how much did Daddy's donations contribute to that?" She didn't wait for an answer. "Your work history shows 3 years at a think tank before this position. Names of supervisors?" Ivy provided them. Charlotte made notes, her pen scratching with exaggerated force. "References for your security clearance?" Ivy listed them, each answer precise, brief, devoid of emotion or defensiveness. "You know what I think?" Charlotte leaned closer to the bars, her voice dropping to a confidential tone that held no actual confidence, only contempt. "I think you're a fraud. I think someone pulled strings to get you here, And you've been faking expertise you don't have. Those tactical assessments with your name on them, someone else wrote those. You just signed them. For the first time, Ivy's eyes moved, focusing directly on Charlotte. The intensity of that gaze made the lieutenant commander take an involuntary half-step backward before she caught herself. "Is that all?" Ivy asked softly. Charlotte's face flushed. "For now, but trust me, by morning we'll have contacted Georgetown, your supposed supervisors, everyone. And when we prove you're a liar, you'll be lucky if civilian prison is your only concern." She stalked away, her exit lacking the confidence of her entrance. In the shadows of the corridor, Master Chief Kane had been watching through the observation window. He waited until Charlotte disappeared around the corner before approaching the cell. "Ma'am?" The word slipped out before Kane could catch it. He cleared his throat. "Miss Whitmore." Ivy's eyes shifted to him, patient and utterly calm. Kane studied her face, looking for something he couldn't quite name. "That rope burn on your left wrist. Mind if I ask how you got it?" "Rock climbing accident, 2 years ago." The answer came too smoothly, too practiced. Kane nodded slowly. "Right, rock climbing?" He'd seen rope burns before. Combat fast rope insertions from helicopters left a very specific pattern, wider at the top, tapered at the bottom, with distinctive friction patterns from tactical descent at speeds that would terrify civilian climbers. The marks on Ivy's wrist matched that pattern exactly. "You know what's interesting?" Kane continued conversationally. "I spent 15 years on submarines before rotating to carrier duty. USS Virginia, 2008 to 2012. Seen a lot of special operations, insertions, and extractions. Got pretty good at recognizing the aftermath." Ivy said nothing, but something shifted in the air between them. A mutual recognition, perhaps, or the first crack in a carefully constructed facade. "Get some rest, miss," Kane said finally, turning away. But his mind was already working through possibilities that seemed impossible. The stance, the scars, the absolute calm under humiliation that would crack most people. The technical knowledge in those assessments that Charlotte claimed were too sophisticated. Something was very wrong with the official story, or very right with a story no one had been told yet. In the officer's wardroom, 3 decks above, Lieutenant Flynn Dalton held court among his fellow FA-18 pilots. At 6 feet tall, with the kind of athletic build that came from equal parts genetics and ego, Dalton represented everything the Navy fighter pilot stereotype promised. Confident to the point of arrogance, skilled enough to partially justify it, and utterly convinced of his own superiority. So, this analyst, this barely 5-foot nobody, told the Admiral his bombing run altitude was wrong, Dalton announced to his appreciative audience of 4 fellow aviators. Like she's ever even seen the inside of an F-18, much less flown combat missions. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, his wingman, laughed. "What did the Admiral do?" "Had her thrown in the brig?" Dalton grinned. Nash said she didn't even protest, just walked like a little robot to her cell. "Daddy's money can't buy everything," another pilot chimed in. "Wait till they dig into her background. Bet she never even set foot in Georgetown. Probably bought the degree online." The conversation would have continued in that vein, men inflating their own importance by deflating someone else's. But Lieutenant Fiona Cross entered the wardroom at precisely that moment. The SEAL liaison officer was compact, efficient, and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned her position through demonstrated capability rather than assumed privilege. "Dalton," she said, her voice cutting through the laughter, "question about the analyst who's in holding." "The fraud?" Dalton's grin widened. "What about her? Her tactical assessment about your bombing run altitudes. Did you actually read it?" The grin faltered slightly. "Skimmed it. Why?" "Because she's right." Fiona pulled up a tablet, displaying weather pattern analysis and enemy air defense capabilities. "Your planned altitude puts you directly in the engagement envelope of their new S-400 systems. You'd lose at least 2 aircraft, possibly 4. The wardroom went quiet. Dalton's face darkened. "That assessment doesn't account for our electronic warfare capabilities." "Yes, it does. Page 7, paragraph 3. She modeled your countermeasures and calculated they'd be insufficient against the updated tracking systems intelligence indicates they're deploying." Fiona's tone remained professional, but her eyes held challenge. "Unless you have information more current than what Fleet Intelligence provided 3 days ago?" Dalton had nothing to say to that. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "That's what I thought," Fiona said quietly, and left. In the corridor outside, Commander Hayes waited. "You're poking the bear, Lieutenant." "Sir, someone needs to. That woman might be a lot of things, but incompetent isn't one of them." Fiona hesitated, then voiced the thought that had been gnawing at her for hours. Permission to conduct a deeper background investigation? Hayes considered this. As executive officer, he walked a dangerous line, supporting the Admiral's decisions while protecting the ship from those same decisions when they proved flawed. Permission granted, but be discreet. And Lieutenant, if you find something, bring it to me before anyone else. Understood, sir. Fiona returned to her small office, barely more than a closet with a desk and a computer terminal. She'd started her career as an intelligence analyst before transitioning to the SEAL liaison role, and she still maintained access to databases most officers never knew existed. She started with the obvious, basic background check on Ivy Whitmore, Georgetown University, confirmed, graduated summa cum laude, think tank employment, confirmed, 3 years with glowing recommendations. Security clearance, valid, issued 18 months ago. Everything checked out on the surface. But Fiona had learned that the surface was often where the truth went to hide. She dug deeper, requesting full employment records. That's when she hit the first wall. Access denied. She tried another database. Access denied. A third attempt. Classified. JPS Level 5 required. Fiona sat back, frowning at her screen. JPS, Joint Personnel Adjudication System. Level 5 clearance was reserved for special access programs. Tier 1 operations. The kind of clearance that gave you access to the nation's most sensitive secrets. Why would a junior civilian analyst have Level 5 restrictions on her file, unless she wasn't a junior civilian analyst? When you're operating in classified environments, communication security isn't optional, it's survival. Military-grade encrypted smartphones with satellite connectivity and biometric authentication ensure your data stays protected even in the most hostile conditions. These devices feature reinforced titanium cases, extended battery life lasting up to 72 hours in standby mode, and are rated for extreme temperatures from -40 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The same technology trusted by special operations units worldwide is now available for security-conscious professionals who refuse to compromise on protection. The evening briefing proceeded without Ivy, Admiral Bradley outlining his tactical plan with renewed confidence. His scheme called for a dawn strike against suspected enemy installations, using a direct approach that prioritized speed over subtlety. Every senior officer in the room nodded along except for 2. Commander Hayes sat with his hands folded, his expression neutral but his eyes calculating trajectories and consequences. Beating him, Captain Arthur Stone, commanding officer of the destroyer USS Porter in the strike group, studied the weather satellite feeds on his tablet with growing concern. "Admiral," Stone spoke up, his voice respectful but firm, "my meteorological officer shares concerns similar to those raised by Analyst Whitmore. The weather pattern developing in the target area. Your meteorological officer is mistaken, Captain," Bradley interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "We've run these projections through Fleet Weather Services. The window is optimal. Sir, with respect, the window is optimal only if the enemy maintains their current defensive posture. But our latest intelligence suggests..." "Suggests what, Captain? That we should trust the paranoid speculation of a civilian analyst over 3 decades of my operational experience?" Bradley's voice carried a warning edge. "Or perhaps you're questioning my judgment as well?" The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Stone held Bradley's gaze for a moment longer than was strictly appropriate, then nodded once. "No, sir. Just ensuring all factors are considered." "They have been considered, and dismissed as unfounded." Bradley closed his folder with finality. "We launch at 0600 hours. That is all." The officers filed out, most satisfied with the Admiral's decisive leadership. But Hayes and Stone exchanged a glance that spoke volumes about doubts left unvoiced. In naval tradition, challenging your commanding officer's decisions was dangerous. Being proven right after challenging those decisions could be career-ending. Better to be wrong alongside your superior than right against him. In the brig, Ivy sat in meditation pose on her bunk, breathing controlled, mind clear. She'd been in worse situations than this. Captured behind enemy lines in Kandahar with 2 bullets in her shoulder. Trapped in a collapsed building in Fallujah with hostile forces sweeping the area above. Stranded in the South China Sea for 16 hours after her insertion helicopter crashed, treading water while enemy patrol boats searched for survivors. This was just theater, an assessment being conducted exactly as planned, measuring not her capabilities but the command environment's character. The Pentagon's Special Projects Division had sent her here specifically to evaluate Admiral Bradley's fitness for command after 3 separate intelligence reports suggested his judgment was deteriorating. Becoming erratic, dismissive of intelligence that contradicted his assumptions, increasingly volatile with subordinates. The mission was simple: embed as a low-level analyst, provide accurate assessments that would inevitably conflict with Bradley's preconceptions, and document how he responded to being challenged. If he responded with thoughtful consideration, weighing evidence objectively, he'd pass. If he responded with ego and retaliation, he'd fail. So far, Bradley was failing spectacularly. A sound echoed down the corridor, footsteps, multiple sets, accompanied by voices raised in forced camaraderie. Ivy opened her eyes as Flynn Dalton appeared at her cell bars, flanked by 3 of his squadron mates. All 4 men carried the loose-limbed confidence of people who had been drinking just enough to blur their judgment. Well, the tactical genius herself, Dalton announced, his words slightly slurred. We decided to give you a little quiz, test those supposed credentials. His friends laughed. Ivy remained seated, hands resting loosely on her knees, expression neutral. Let's start easy, Dalton continued. FA-18 Super Hornet. Maximum combat radius with full air-to-ground payload. Go. 490 nautical miles, Ivy replied, her voice steady and emotionless. Dalton blinked, surprised she'd answered at all. Lucky guess. How about this? Classified combat radius with conformal fuel tanks and reduced weapons load. That information wasn't public. It required access to operational specifications marked secret. Ivy shouldn't have known it, but she did. 720 nautical miles, assuming optimal altitude and minimal afterburner usage. The answer came without hesitation. The drunken confidence drained from Dalton's face. His wingman, Lieutenant Webb, frowned. How do you know classified specifications? Standard intelligence briefing materials, Ivy said, which was technically true if you counted Tier 1 operational briefings as standard. Bull, Dalton growled. He leaned closer to the bars, trying to use his height advantage even through steel. You're making educated guesses and hoping we don't call you on it. Fine, let's try something you can't fake. Single-engine failure procedure at low altitude during carrier recovery. Ivy's eyes never left his face. Maintain nose attitude, advance throttle on functioning engine, establish positive rate of climb, notify air boss of emergency, request straight-in approach, dump ordnance and fuel if necessary to reduce weight, configure for single-engine landing with extended approach pattern. She paused for exactly 1 second. And if you're below 1,000 feet when the engine fails, you eject immediately because recovery probability drops to 12%. The corridor fell silent. That last detail, the ejection threshold and survival statistics, came from classified accident analysis reports. Information shared only with pilots during advanced training. "Who the hell are you?" Webb whispered. Ivy said nothing, but something flickered in her eyes, there and gone in an instant. Amusement, perhaps, or satisfaction at finally cracking their certainty. Dalton's hand moved before his brain could stop it. He shoved forward, his palm making contact with Ivy's shoulder through the bars. It wasn't a strike, more a forceful push, the kind of physical intimidation that bullies worldwide had perfected. But Ivy's body didn't respond the way a civilian analyst's would. Her torso rotated with the push, redirecting the force, while her legs shifted into a fighting stance. Weight on her back foot, front foot light and mobile, hands coming up in a defensive position that looked casual but placed them perfectly to counter any follow-up attack. The movement took 0.5 seconds, pure muscle memory, the kind of reaction pattern that only came from thousands of hours of close-quarters combat training. Then she stopped herself, forcing her body to relax back into a sitting position. But the damage was done. All 4 pilots had seen it, that momentary transformation from passive victim to something else entirely. "Did you see that?" Webb grabbed Dalton's arm. "That wasn't... Civilians don't move like..." "Shut up," Dalton hissed, but his eyes were wide, uncertainty flooding in where arrogance had lived moments before. He backed away from the cell, his friends following, their drunken confidence evaporated into sudden, cold sobriety. Senior Chief Martha Reed had been watching the entire exchange from the security office at the corridor's end. As the carrier's flight deck chief, she'd seen 23 years of personnel come and go, and she'd developed a finely tuned instinct for trouble. What she'd just witnessed didn't fit any category she recognized. She picked up the internal phone. "Commander Hayes, Senior Chief Reed, sir, you need to come to the brig, now." By the time Hayes arrived 15 minutes later, Reed had pulled the security footage. Together, they watched the replay on the small monitor, Dalton's push, Ivy's instant defensive reaction, the way her body had moved with a precision that seemed computer-generated in its perfection. "That's not self-defense class training," Reed said quietly. "That's combat conditioning, the kind that gets burned into your nervous system until you can't turn it off." Hayes leaned closer to the screen, studying Ivy's stance in the frozen frame. "Where does a Georgetown analyst learn close-quarters combat response at that level?" "She doesn't, sir, unless—" Reed hesitated, unwilling to voice a possibility that seemed absurd, but Hayes finished the thought. "Unless she's not actually a Georgetown analyst." They stared at the screen for a long moment, watching the footage loop. Finally, Hayes straightened. "I want you to personally review every interaction Miss Whitmore has had since boarding this ship. Every conversation, every gesture, every moment on camera. And Senior Chief, do it quietly." "Aye, sir." Hayes made his way to Fiona Cross's office, where he found the SEAL liaison officer still hunched over her terminal, eyes bloodshot from hours of screen time. "Talk to me, Lieutenant. What have you found?" Fiona looked up, frustration evident on her face. "Walls, sir. Every database I try to access deeper than surface level hits classified firewalls. Her employment history, her security clearance file, even her medical records, all sealed behind JPAS Level 5 restrictions." Level 5. Hayes absorbed this. "That's special access." "That's Tier 1 special access, sir. The kind of clearance that means you're either working with or directly in special operations units." Fiona pulled up a comparison on her screen. "For reference, I have Level 3 clearance as SEAL liaison. Captain Stone has Level 4 as Destroyer Squadron Commander. Level 5 is reserved for DEVGRU, Delta, CIA Special Activities, ISA. Hayes finished the list, his voice dropping. "Are you telling me our junior analyst has higher clearance than the carrier's commanding officer? I'm telling you someone very high up the chain doesn't want us knowing who she really is." Fiona's fingers danced across the keyboard. "Sir, I think I can bypass the firewalls, but it'll leave traces. If I'm wrong about this, my career is over." Hayes considered the variables. His instinct as XO was to protect his people, but his instinct as an officer who had seen too many good sailors crushed by bad leadership told him something else. "Do it. Whatever consequences come, I'll take responsibility." "Aye, sir." Fiona's hands moved with purpose, navigating through security protocols she technically shouldn't know how to bypass. Her intelligence analyst background was proving more valuable than the Navy had intended. The first firewall fell after 20 minutes. The second took 40. The third required a call to a friend at NSA who owed her a favor and didn't ask questions. By the time the fourth and final wall crumbled at 0200 hours, both Fiona and Hayes were operating on caffeine and determination. The file that emerged made them both freeze. Notice how Ivy hasn't said more than 10 words this entire time? That's not weakness. That's discipline. Real operators don't need to prove themselves with words. They let their actions speak. Subscribe now, because what's about to be revealed will change your entire perspective on who the real warriors are in this situation. The photograph filled Fiona's screen. Ivy Whitmore, but not the Ivy they knew. This Ivy wore full tactical gear, plate carrier loaded with ammunition, rifle held with the casual competence of someone who'd carried weapons longer than most people had held jobs. Her face showed the same calm expression, but her eyes held something different, harder, more distant, the eyes of someone who had seen things that changed your relationship with violence forever. The DEVGRU patch on her shoulder gleamed even in the photograph's harsh lighting. The trident insignia, eagle clutching an anchor, trident and flintlock pistol, marked her as SEAL qualified. But DEVGRU meant more than that. DEVGRU meant SEAL Team 6, the tier beyond Tier 1, the operators who handled missions that didn't officially exist. Sweet mother of... Fiona caught herself, scrolling down to the text below the image. Each line of Ivy's real service record hit like a physical blow. Commander Ivy Whitmore, 05 rank. Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Call sign, Ghost, actual. Years of service, 12. Combat deployments, 4 theaters, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and 1 listed simply as redacted. Decorations, Navy Cross, 3, Silver Star, 5, Purple Heart, 3, Bronze Star with Valor, 7, Defense Meritorious Service Medal, Joint Service Commendation Medal. The operations list stretched for pages, most of it blacked out under classification. But fragments remained visible. Kandahar Province, direct action raid, 17 hostiles neutralized, 3 SEALs wounded, mission success. Fallujah, urban warfare, building collapse, extracted 4 wounded personnel under fire. Al-Tanf, Syria, cross-border intelligence operation, redacted. And at the bottom of her current assignment description, Deep Cover Command Climate Assessment, Special Projects Division, Office of the Secretary of the Navy. Mission parameters: evaluate RADM Hector Bradley for fitness for continued command. Assessment officer granted authority to recommend relief of command if subject demonstrates patterns consistent with failure to process intelligence objectively, retaliation against subordinates for professional disagreement, prioritization of ego over mission effectiveness. Do not compromise cover under any circumstances. Sir, Fiona's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. We threw a DEVGRU commander in the brig. Hayes had gone pale, one hand braced against the desk as if the carrier were listing. The Admiral humiliated a 3-time Navy Cross recipient in front of 50 officers. Nash physically assaulted her. Dalton and his squadron mocked her expertise. Charlotte accused her of fraud. They stared at each other, the full magnitude of the disaster crystallizing. This wasn't just an embarrassment. This was career-ending, potentially prosecution-level negligence. You didn't put your hands on a DEVGRU operator. You didn't imprison someone the Secretary of the Navy had personally assigned to evaluate your commanding officer. We need to inform the Admiral immediately, Fiona said. No. Hayes's voice was sharp, his mind already racing ahead through scenarios. Think about what happens if Bradley learns the truth now. He'll claim entrapment, that she deceived us, that the entire assessment is invalid because she wasn't operating in good faith. But sir, she's running an evaluation, Lieutenant, and we've just proven every concern that led to this mission being authorized in the first place. Bradley dismissed expert analysis because it contradicted his assumptions. He retaliated against someone who challenged him. He created a command environment where subordinates felt empowered to abuse someone they perceived as weak. Hayes straightened, decision crystallizing. The assessment isn't finished. It finishes when she says it finishes. The Admiral is planning to transfer her off the ship tomorrow at 1400 hours. Helicopter extraction. Then we have, Hayes checked his watch, 11 hours to figure out how to prevent the Secretary of the Navy's hand-picked assessment officer from being removed before completing her mission. And if we can't stop it, Hayes's smile was grim. Then Admiral Bradley's career ends the moment that helicopter lifts off. Except instead of a poor evaluation leading to quiet retirement, he'll face a formal investigation for impeding a SecNavi-authorized assessment, assault on a superior officer, and unlawful detention. Either way, he's done. Either way, he did it to himself. In the brig, Ivy lay on her bunk, fully awake despite the late hour. She had cataloged 93 different sounds in the carrier's nighttime rhythm, the hum of ventilation systems, the distant clang of maintenance work, the periodic footsteps of roving security patrols, the subtle vibration patterns that indicated everything from aircraft movements on the flight deck above to the carrier's power plant operations 4 decks below. She'd also identified the moment, approximately 27 minutes ago, when someone had successfully bypassed the security protocols on her classified file. The intrusion left electronic signatures, if you knew what to look for, and Ivy's training had included months of counterintelligence work, which meant someone now knew who she really was. The question was who and what they'd do with that information. The mission was entering its critical phase. Bradley would likely attempt to remove her tomorrow before any deeper investigation could occur, which, ironically, would constitute the final evidence needed to recommend relief of command. Or someone who'd learned her identity might intervene, which would complicate the assessment but potentially prevent further escalation. Either way, the evaluation was nearly complete. Bradley had demonstrated patterns of rejecting accurate intelligence that contradicted his operational assumptions, retaliating against subordinates who disagreed with him, creating a hostile environment that discouraged dissent, and making tactical decisions based on ego rather than objective analysis. Every criterion for recommending relief of command had been met. The mission was a success. She'd proven what the Pentagon suspected. Tomorrow would simply be the dramatic conclusion to a foregone determination. Ivy closed her eyes, regulated her breathing, and drifted into the light sleep of someone who'd learned to rest in far worse circumstances. 4 hours. That's all she needed to be fully combat ready if circumstances required it. She'd need every second of those 4 hours. Because what she couldn't know, what no amount of DEVGRU training could predict, was that in 6 hours and 43 minutes, the threat she'd warned about in her tactical assessment would materialize. Enemy forces would launch the exact attack she'd predicted using the precise vector she'd outlined. Admiral Bradley's dismissal of her intelligence would place 5,000 sailors in direct danger. And when that happened, the assessment would become irrelevant, because Ivy Whitmore would have to make a choice: maintain her cover and let the crisis play out through official channels, or blow 12 weeks of deep cover work by taking command and saving lives. For someone who had spent 12 years making impossible choices in impossible situations, it wasn't really a choice at all. Morning briefing commenced at 0500 hours in the same theater where Ivy had been humiliated 16 hours earlier. Admiral Bradley stood at the podium, pointing to tactical displays that showed the planned strike route. Every line of his operational plan followed the assumptions Ivy had challenged. Commander Hayes sat in the second row, watching the Admiral outline an attack that tactical probability models gave a 68% chance of failure. Captain Stone sat 3 seats down, his destroyer's role in the plan requiring him to position his ship in waters where enemy submarines were likely operating. Both men maintained professional expressions while internally calculating casualty projections. "Questions?" Bradley asked, his tone suggesting he expected none. Hayes raised one hand. "Admiral, regarding the weather pattern developing in the target area, already addressed, Commander. Proceed as planned." "Sir, if I could just—" "I said it's addressed." Bradley's voice carried an edge that made several junior officers shift uncomfortably. "Unless you have tactical concerns about your specific role in this operation, I suggest we move forward." Hayes sat back, face neutral, but his fingers drummed once against his knee, a tell that Stone recognized as suppressed frustration. "Launch proceeds at 0600 hours, Bradley continued. "Expect first weapons on target by 0645. Any actual questions?" Silence. "Good. Dismissed." The officers filed out. Stone caught Hayes's eye, tilting his head toward a private corridor. They moved there, checking for observers before speaking. "He's going to get people killed," Stone said bluntly. "I know." "So, what do we do?" Hayes pulled out his phone, showing Stone a message he'd prepared but not yet sent. The recipient, Commander Audrey Foster, Strike Group Intelligence Director, currently coordinating operations from Pearl Harbor. The message contained 2 words: "Execute Phoenix." "What's Phoenix, Banished?" Stone asked. "Something I'm not authorized to discuss, but if things go as badly as we expect, Phoenix represents our contingency." Hayes's thumb hovered over the send button. "The question is whether I send it now or wait until disaster is imminent. If you wait until disaster is imminent, people die while we're implementing the contingency. If I send it now, I've committed insubordination before the disaster proves necessary." Stone studied his fellow officer's face. "You're going to send it anyway, aren't you?" Hayes's thumb came down, the message sent. "Already done. Because if there's one thing I've learned in 26 years of service, it's that the time to prepare for disaster is before the disaster, not during." On the flight deck, dawn broke over a carrier preparing for combat operations. FA-18s were being armed with precision-guided munitions, their weapons loads configured exactly as Admiral Bradley had specified. Flynn Dalton performed his pre-flight inspection with less than his usual arrogance, his mind still replaying Ivy's defensive movement from the previous night. "You're quiet," his wingman noted, checking his own aircraft 2 parking spots down. "Just thinking." "About the Analyst?" Dalton didn't answer immediately. Finally, "Webb, you ever meet someone who made you realize you might have been completely wrong about something? Like what? Like what makes someone dangerous? What makes them qualified? What makes them worthy of respect? Dalton ran his hand along his FA-18's fuselage, the metal cold under his fingers. "I've been flying fighters for 8 years. I'm good at it, maybe great at it, but that woman knew classified specifications and operational procedures that took me years to learn, and she knew them without hesitation, without ego, like they were just facts. So, she's smart, doesn't change what the Admiral said. Doesn't it?" Dalton looked up at the lightning sky. "I've been in this squadron for 4 years. I've seen 3 different admirals. Know what they all had in common? They were never wrong, could never be wrong, because being wrong meant weakness, and weakness meant someone might question their authority." He paused. "But what if being wrong is just being human? And what if refusing to admit you're wrong is actually the weakness?" Webb had no answer for that. So they finished their pre-flights in silence, each man contemplating questions that had no easy answers. In the brig, Ivy was woken by Cole bringing breakfast, reconstituted eggs and toast that qualified as food only by the most generous definition. "Eat up, princess," Cole said, sliding the tray through the slot. "You're catching a helicopter off this ship at 1400 hours. Admiral wants you gone before you can contaminate anyone else with your daddy's money attitude." Ivy took the tray without comment. Cole lingered, hoping for a reaction he could report back. When none came, he snorted in disgust and walked away. She ate mechanically, her mind already running through scenarios for the day ahead. Transfer off the carrier meant the assessment would end incomplete. Not ideal, but sufficient evidence existed to support a negative recommendation. Bradley would face an inquiry. Nash, Cole, Charlotte, and others would give testimony. The investigation would be bureaucratic, slow, but ultimately thorough. Careers would end, new policies would be implemented. The system would course correct, as it always did eventually, too late for those already crushed by its failures, but in time to prevent the next generation from suffering the same injustice. It wasn't perfect, but in 12 years of service, Ivy had learned that perfect was a fairy tale. You did what you could with what you had, and you hoped it mattered. At 05:47 hours, the carrier's general quarters alarm began to wail. The sound was distinctive, a klaxon designed to be heard over jet engines and machinery, to pierce through sleep and conversation and everything else, to trigger immediate adrenaline responses in 5,000 personnel. It was followed by the 1MC announcement system, the captain's voice cutting through with words that turned blood cold. General quarters, all hands man, your battle stations. Inbound hostile contacts, multiple vectors. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." In the brig, Ivy was on her feet before the first syllable finished echoing through the speakers. Her hands moved in a pre-combat check pattern that her conscious mind didn't even register. Checking for weapons she didn't have, seeking equipment that wasn't there, running through tactical protocols for a situation she couldn't influence. Yet, Cole came running back down the corridor, his earlier smugness replaced by something approaching panic. "Stay in your cell," he barked at Ivy, which might have been the least necessary order ever given. She had no way to leave even if she wanted to. "What's happening?" Ivy asked, her voice calm in contrast to the chaos erupting through the ship. "None of your business." But Cole's face had gone pale, and his hands shook slightly as he checked that the cell door was secure. He ran back toward his duty station, leaving Ivy alone with the sound of controlled chaos filtering through the ventilation system. High-risk professionals face unique financial challenges that standard insurance policies can't address. Specialized insurance coverage designed for military contractors and government operators provides comprehensive protection, including emergency extraction services, legal defense funds up to $2 million, and family protection benefits that activate regardless of mission classification. Investment portfolios tailored for irregular income patterns with tax-advantaged accounts for hazard pay ensure your financial security matches your operational readiness. When your job takes you into classified situations, your financial planning needs the same level of sophistication. On the bridge, Captain Stone had taken tactical command of his destroyer, repositioning in response to the threat data pouring through combat systems. His tactical officer's voice cut through the organized chaos. "Confirmed, sir. 4 anti-ship missiles inbound, sea-skimming approach, estimated time to impact 8 minutes 30 seconds. Air defense network? Coming online now, sir, but the approach vector," the officer's voice caught. "Sir, they're coming in exactly where that analyst's assessment predicted they would. the vector we dismissed as paranoid speculation. Stone's face remained professionally neutral, but his jaw tightened fractionally. On the tactical display, the missile tracks converged on the carrier strike group from an angle that exploited a gap in their defensive posture, a gap that wouldn't have existed if they'd followed Ivy's recommended formation changes. He opened the encrypted command channel to the Roosevelt. Admiral Bradley, request permission to execute defensive pattern Whitmore Delta 79. Static. Then Bradley's voice, tight with stress. That pattern was never officially approved for. Sir, with respect, we're 8 minutes from impact and our current formation leaves the carrier exposed. Whitmore's pattern closes the gap. A pause that stretched for 3 seconds. An eternity in combat time. Then, execute the pattern. All ships, combat formation, Whitmore Delta 79, execute immediately. The carrier strike group shifted like a living organism. Destroyers and cruisers repositioning, aircraft launching to provide combat air patrol, every element moving into the defensive posture that Ivy had outlined 3 days earlier. The pattern that Admiral Bradley had dismissed as the paranoid fantasies of a junior analyst who couldn't possibly understand real combat operations. The pattern that was now the only thing standing between 5,000 sailors and disaster. On the carrier's flight deck, chaos erupted as aircraft were scrambled ahead of schedule. Flynn Dalton strapped into his FA-18, his crew chief practically throwing him the last equipment checks as the launch officer gave the signal to move into position. "What's our target?" Dalton asked over the radio. "Defensive patrol, Sector 7, came the response. "Inbound missiles, probable follow-up airstrike. Sector 7, that's..." Dalton's hands moved through the startup sequence automatically while his brain processed implications. "That's exactly where Whitmore said they'd attack from." "Copy that. She called it 3 days ago down to the vector azimuth. Now, get airborne before they're in range." Dalton's FA-18 shot down the catapult, compressed air and physics accelerating 23 tons of aircraft from 0 to 170 miles per hour in 2 seconds. The force pressed him back into his seat with familiar intensity as the carrier dropped away beneath him and the South China Sea spread out in every direction. His radio crackled with the coordinated chatter of a strike group under attack. Missile tracking updates, defensive responses, status reports from every ship and aircraft in the formation. Through it all, Dalton's mind kept returning to one thought. The woman they'd mocked, imprisoned, and humiliated had been right about everything, which meant every assumption he'd made about competence, about credibility, about who deserved respect and who deserved contempt. All of it had been catastrophically wrong. In the carrier's Combat Information Center, Commander Hayes coordinated defensive responses, while Admiral Bradley stood frozen at the command station, his face cycling through expressions too quickly to track. Shock, denial, realization, horror, the entire sequence of someone watching their world collapse in real time. "Sir," Hayes said, his voice cutting through the Admiral's paralysis, "we need your authorization for Aegis weapon release." Bradley blinked, finding his voice. "Authorized defensive?" The carrier lurched, not from a hit but from a near miss, one of the anti-ship missiles detonating in the water, 200 yards off the starboard bow, as defensive systems successfully intercepted it. The blast wave rolled through the massive vessel like a shockwave through flesh. Alarms screamed, damage control teams activated, and somewhere deep in the brig, Ivy Whitmore stood in her cell with her hands against the cold steel walls, feeling every vibration, reading the battle through the language of impacts and responses that she'd learned in a dozen combat zones. She knew, with the certainty of someone who'd lived through variations of this scenario in 3 different theaters, that the missile attack was just the opening move. The real assault would follow. Aircraft, possibly submarines, coordinated to exploit the chaos and confusion of the initial strike. She also knew that Admiral Bradley, for all his decades of peacetime command experience, had never actually fought a ship in combat. His tactical decisions would come from theory and exercises, not from the hard-won instincts of someone who could orchestrated violence in 3-dimensional space against thinking opponents who wanted you dead. The carrier strike group needed someone with those instincts, someone who could anticipate the next move, the next threat, the next vector of attack. They needed Ghost Actual. The question was whether Ghost Actual would reveal herself, or whether Commander Ivy Whitmore would maintain the facade until after the battle, leaving the outcome in the hands of officers who'd proven themselves willing to ignore accurate intelligence in favor of comfortable assumptions. For 12 years, she'd been trained to complete the mission. For 12 years, she'd learned that personal considerations came second to operational objectives. For 12 years, she'd perfected the art of doing what was necessary rather than what was comfortable. But there was another principle, one that predated the mission parameters and training protocols. A principle carved into the heart of every naval officer from their first day at the academy. Your ship, your shipmates, your life, in that order. 5,000 sailors aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt. 5,000 people whose lives depended on decisions being made by a commander who'd just proven his judgment was fatally flawed. Ivy closed her eyes, took one breath, made her choice. When she opened her eyes again, they held the hard clarity of someone who'd just decided to destroy 12 weeks of careful assessment work in favor of keeping people alive. "Master Chief Kane!" she shouted, her voice carrying down the corridor with the projection of someone accustomed to making herself heard over gunfire. "I need to speak with Commander Hayes immediately. This is a tactical emergency." A pause, then running footsteps. Time to see if the mission could survive contact with reality. Master Chief Kane arrived at a dead run, his boots hammering against the deck, plating with the urgency of someone who had heard something in Ivy's voice that transcended rank and protocol. Behind him came Commander Hayes, face set in grim determination, tablet clutched in one hand. "Miss Whitmore," Kane started, then caught himself as Hayes shot him a warning look. They both knew what the tablet contained. They both understood the impossibility of the situation, but operational security protocols were clear, even in crisis. "Commander Hayes," Ivy said, her voice carrying the clipped precision of someone delivering a tactical briefing. "The missile attack you're experiencing is the opening phase of a 3-part assault. Secondary wave will consist of airstrikes from bearing 047 degrees, launching in approximately..." She tilted her head, listening to vibrations through the carrier's structure that most people wouldn't even notice. 6 to 8 minutes. Tertiary phase will be submarine-launched torpedoes targeting the carrier's propulsion systems, timing coordinated to hit during maximum defensive distraction. Hayes stared at her through the bars. "How could you possibly know?" "Because it's exactly what I would do if I were planning this attack. And because I've seen this tactical pattern twice before in other theaters." Ivy's hands gripped the cell bars, her knuckles white with controlled intensity. "Commander, you need someone with combat experience coordinating defensive responses. Admiral Bradley has never fought an actual naval engagement. He's going to react to each threat sequentially instead of anticipating the cascade. People are going to die." The carrier shuddered again, another near-miss detonation rattling through the superstructure. Somewhere above them, damage control alarms wailed. Kane looked at Hayes. Hayes looked at his tablet, at the classified file that proved everything Ivy was saying came from someone with the credentials to back it up. But releasing her meant acknowledging they knew who she really was, which meant compromising her mission, which meant potential court-martial for everyone involved. "Sir," Kane said quietly, "whatever she is or isn't, she's right about the Admiral. I've served under combat commanders. Bradley isn't one of them." Hayes' jaw worked as he calculated probabilities, weighed regulations against reality, measured career survival against the lives of 5,000 sailors. The math wasn't even close. He pulled out his keycard and swiped aside through the cell lock. The magnetic bolt clicked open with a sound like fate shifting gears. "Miss Whitmore, you're being released into my custody pending transfer off this vessel. The helicopter will be ready at 1400 hours as planned." Hayes met her eyes, and in that look passed an entire conversation that neither could speak aloud. "Until then, you'll remain with Master Chief Kane, for your safety." Ivy understood immediately. The cover story maintained, the assessment technically intact, but freedom of movement restored, with exactly enough deniability to survive an inquiry. "Understood, sir." She stepped through the doorway, and something subtle shifted in her bearing, not obvious enough to be called transformation, but present enough that both men felt it. A certain economy of movement, a predatory awareness of space and angles, the way a house cat moves versus how a tiger moves through tall grass. "Kane, take her to..." Hayes started, but another explosion cut him off, this one close enough that the lights flickered and the deck tilted 3 degrees to starboard before compensating. The 1MC crackled. "Brace for impact! Brace for impact! Multiple inbound!" The announcement cut off as something catastrophic happened to the communication systems. In the sudden silence, Ivy's voice carried with absolute clarity. That was a hit. Probably glancing impact on the flight-to-deck aft section. They're walking their fire forward, trying to disable aircraft launch capability. She was already moving toward the ladder, Kane and Hayes following. We need to get to CIC or the flight deck. Somewhere I can coordinate. You can't, Hayes said, keeping pace. The moment you start giving tactical orders, everyone will know you're not just an analyst. Then everyone's going to know, Ivy replied without breaking stride. Because the alternative is watching this strike group get systematically dismantled while I maintain a cover story. They emerged onto a cross-deck passage where organized chaos reigned. Sailors ran in both directions, some toward their battle stations, others carrying equipment or helping wounded. The acrid smell of burning jet fuel mixed with the salt air that poured through a damaged bulkhead somewhere aft. Admiral Bradley's voice boomed over the functional 1MC speakers. All aircraft, engage defensive protocols. All ships, maintain formation integrity. We will not. Another impact, harder than before. The carrier listed 5 degrees. Red emergency lighting kicked in as primary power failed in this section. And through the smoke and confusion, Ivy heard something that made her freeze mid-step. The helicopter, spinning up on the flight deck above them. The helicopter that was supposed to extract her at 1400 hours, now being prepared for emergency launch to get non-essential personnel off the carrier before the situation deteriorated further. Which meant, in approximately 3 minutes, she'd be forcibly evacuated whether she cooperated or not. Standard protocol during combat operations. Civilians and non-combat personnel got removed first to reduce casualty potential and free up medical resources. Commander, Ivy said, turning to Hayes with an expression that held equal parts frustration and resignation. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Hayes looked at this small woman, whose file claimed she'd survived situations that killed trained operators, who'd earned decorations for valor that most admirals never saw in entire careers, who'd been right about literally everything, while his commanding officer had been catastrophically wrong. What do you need? Access to the flight deck. 30 seconds. That's all. If you're planning what I think you're planning, then my mission is already compromised, and all we can do is minimize casualties. Ivy's voice softened fractionally. Sir, I've been in worse situations than this. Trust me to do my job. Kane was already moving, leading them toward the nearest flight deck access point. They climbed 3 ladders in near darkness, guided by emergency lighting and the muscle memory of men who'd learned this ship's geography through years of service. The sounds of battle grew louder, aircraft engines, defensive weapons firing, the distinctive crack of close-in weapon systems engaging targets. They emerged onto the flight deck into hell, rendered in jet fuel and cordite. 2 FA-18s had been damaged by the earlier hits, their twisted wreckage creating obstacles that flight operations crews navigated with practiced efficiency. The helicopter sat forward and to starboard, rotors building toward takeoff speed, a Marine security team forming up nearby to escort evacuees. Commander Derek Nash stood near the helicopter, coordinating the evacuation with the same aggressive efficiency he brought to every task. When he saw Ivy emerging from the deck access with Kane and Hayes, his face cycled through confusion to anger to something approaching vindication. There you are, Nash shouted over the rotor noise, striding toward them with 2 Marines in tow. Let's go. You're on the first lift out of here. Commander, I don't think... Hayes started. Not your call, Hayes. Admiral's orders. All civilian personnel evacuate immediately. Nash grabbed for Ivy's arm, the same rough grip he'd used to drag her to the brig. Move it. But this time, when his hand closed around her bicep, Ivy didn't come quietly. Her body shifted, redirecting his pull, and suddenly Nash was stumbling forward off balance while she stood perfectly centered. The movement was so smooth it looked choreographed, like they had practiced this dance 100 times. Sir, Ivy said, her voice calm despite the chaos, with respect, I should stay and... The world exploded, not metaphorically, not hyperbolically. The world actually exploded as a missile that had evaded the defensive network detonated in the water 75 yards off the port bow. The blast wave rolled across the flight deck like the hand of an angry god, picking up loose equipment and people with equal indifference. Ivy saw it coming a fraction of a second before impact, saw the water bulging upward, saw the flash, saw the physics equation that was about to distribute violence across everything within the blast radius. She grabbed Nash's tactical vest and pulled him down behind an aircraft tow tractor In the instant before the shockwave arrived, the world went white, then red, then a ringing silence that spoke of temporary hearing loss. Debris rained down. Water, metal fragments, pieces of equipment that had been secured moments before. Ivy felt something hot slice across her right shoulder, felt the fabric of her uniform shirt tear, felt the familiar burn that meant blood flow and potential injury requiring attention later, when there was time for such luxuries. She rolled to her feet, pulling Nash up with her. The Marine was dazed, blood running from his nose, his eyes unfocused with concussion. Around them, the flight deck had transformed into a disaster zone. Personnel were down, some moving, some not. The helicopter had been pushed 20 feet across the deck by the blast, its tail rotor damaged, the pilot fighting to shut down before catastrophic failure. And Ivy's uniform shirt, already old and worn, had torn completely across the left side from collar to hem. The fabric hung in tatters, exposing her left rib cage, exposing the DEVGRU trident tattoo that marked her as SEAL qualified, exposing the scar pattern from an IED blast in Kandahar, the distinctive spider web of shrapnel impacts and burn tissue that screamed combat veteran to anyone who'd ever seen the real thing, exposing the bullet graze scar on her shoulder that had earned her one of her 3 Purple Hearts. Master Chief Kane, who'd been thrown against a parked aircraft by the blast, pulled himself upright and found himself staring directly at Ivy's exposed torso, at the tattoo that only approximately 200 active-duty personnel in the entire Navy were authorized to wear, at scars that told stories of survival that most people would call impossible. His eyes went wide, his mouth opened, no sound came out. Ivy grabbed the Marine guarding her, a young corporal whose name tape read Morrison, and pulled him to his feet. "Are you injured?" Morrison stared at her tattoo, at her scars, at her feet. You're focus, Corporal. Are you injured?" "No, ma'am." The words slipped out automatically, the honorific that junior enlisted used for officers. He caught himself. "I mean, miss. I mean..." Another explosion, closer this time. The secondary air attack Ivy had predicted was arriving exactly on schedule. Aircraft appeared on the horizon, closing fast, and the carrier's defensive weapons opened up with a sound like God clearing his throat. Ivy turned toward the island superstructure where CIC was located, where Admiral Bradley was presumably coordinating responses that were 18 months out of date based on peacetime exercises rather than actual combat experience. She took one step in that direction and stopped, because the water 400 yards off the carrier's port side was moving wrong, bulging upward, churning, the distinctive pattern of something very large displacing massive volumes of ocean as it rose from the depths. The USS Montana broke the surface like a breaching whale rendered in black steel and hostile intent. Water cascaded off its hull in sheets, its sail tower rising into view with the slow inevitability of judgment itself. A Virginia-class nuclear submarine, one of the Navy's most advanced platforms, surfacing in the middle of a combat zone in direct violation of every tactical doctrine governing submarine operations. The flight deck went silent. Every person still conscious stopped what they were doing to stare at the impossible apparition. Submarines didn't surface during combat. Submarines especially didn't surface next to aircraft carriers under attack, exposing themselves to enemy fire and compromising their strategic advantage, unless they had a very good reason. The Montana's sail hatch opened. A figure emerged, visible even at this distance, dressed in full tactical gear with a distinctive desert digital pattern that SEAL teams had made famous in 100 classified operations. Then another figure, then 6 more, a full SEAL team standing at attention on the submarine's deck, all facing the carrier. The lead figure raised a radio to his face. His voice came through on the carrier's tactical frequency, audible to everyone with a headset or anyone near a speaker. "Ghost Actual, this is Serpent 7. We're surfacing on your position against 7th Fleet orders. Your SEALs are coming home, Commander." The words hit the flight deck like a second explosion. Commander, not analyst, not civilian, Commander. Every eye swiveled from the submarine to Ivy, to her exposed tattoo, to her scars, to the way she stood, weight balanced, ready, absolutely calm in the center of chaos, while everyone around her struggled with shock and confusion. Master Chief Kane found his voice first. He snapped into attention with parade ground precision, rendered a textbook perfect salute, and spoke loud enough for everyone within 50 feet to hear. "Commander Whitmore, welcome home, ma'am. The effect rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. Every enlisted sailor who could see what was happening came to attention. Hands rose in salute. The Marines who had been guarding her as a prisoner now stood at attention, arms rigid, faces cycling through emotions too complex to name. Commander Hayes emerged from the deck access hatch, took one look at the situation, and added his own salute. "Commander, the ship needs you." Nash, still dazed from the blast, stared at Ivy with an expression that suggested his entire worldview was crumbling in real time. "You said you were..." "I said exactly what my mission parameters required me to say," Ivy replied quietly. Then her voice hardened, shifted registers, took on the tone of someone accustomed to giving orders in situations where hesitation meant death. "Master Chief, I need a tactical headset and access to the command network. Hayes, get me Admiral Bradley on direct comms. Everyone else, return to your battle stations. We have approximately 4 minutes before the tertiary submarine attack phase, and I need this strike group in defensive posture before those torpedoes launch." The flight deck erupted into motion, but not the panicked chaos from before. This was organized, purposeful, driven by the presence of someone who radiated absolute confidence in their ability to handle the impossible. Lieutenant Fiona Cross sprinted across the deck, a tactical headset in one hand and a tablet in the other. "Commander, I have your full file here. She hesitated, professional composure cracking slightly. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. We didn't know. We should have trusted..." "Later, Lieutenant. Right now, I need you to coordinate submarine warfare assets. Montana, get me Captain Blake on secure channel." The submarine's commanding officer came through immediately, his voice carrying the calm of someone who just committed career suicide and felt good about it. "Ghost Actual, Serpent 7 standing by. My career is over, but my boat and crew are at your disposal." "Acknowledged, Serpent 7. Your career isn't over, but we'll discuss that after we survive the next 10 minutes. I need you to position for counter-submarine operations. Bearing 270, depth pattern Delta Sigma 4. Enemy sub is lurking at 250 feet, waiting for optimal launch window." "How do you know?" Blake started, then caught himself. "Never mind. Diving now. Serpent 7 out." The Montana submerged as quickly as it had surfaced, the ocean swallowing it like it had never been there. But its appearance had accomplished what Ivy needed: validation, proof, authority granted through the most dramatic possible demonstration that she was exactly who Master Chief Kane had just called her. Admiral Bradley's voice cut through the tactical channel, tight with stress and confusion. "Who is giving orders on my command network? Hayes, well, what the hell is happening on that flight deck?" Hayes keyed his own mic. "Sir, Commander Whitmore has tactical recommendations that I believe you should hear." "Commander who? Hayes, we don't have time for..." Ivy took the headset from Fiona and spoke with the clipped precision of someone delivering combat orders under fire. "Admiral Bradley, this is Commander Ivy Whitmore, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, operating under SECNAV Special Projects Authority. Sir, you have approximately 3 minutes before enemy submarines launch torpedoes at this carrier. I need you to execute evasive maneuver, Whitmore Echo 3, immediately, and coordinate with Montana for counter-submarine operations." Silence on the channel, long enough that several people on the flight deck exchanged worried glances. Then, "Commander Whitmore, the analyst in my brig was never an analyst, sir. I'm a DEVGRU team commander conducting a command climate assessment. We can discuss the mission parameters after we survive this attack. Right now, I need you to trust that I know what I'm talking about, because I've fought this exact scenario twice before, and I'm the best chance you have of keeping this carrier afloat." Another pause. Then Bradley's voice, smaller somehow, diminished. "Hayes, can you confirm her identity?" "Yes, sir. I have her full service record. Navy Cross 3 times. DEVGRU commander. She's legitimate." The silence stretched. Every second that passed was a second closer to torpedo launch, a second closer to catastrophic damage, a second that Admiral Bradley spent wrestling with the death of his ego versus the survival of his ship. "Execute maneuver Echo 3, he said finally. "All ships. Combat formation per Commander Whitmore's specifications. Someone get her to CIC immediately." Ivy was already moving, Kane and Hayes flanking her like an honor guard, Fiona running ahead to clear the path. They descended into the carrier's bowels, through passages choked with damage control teams and wounded being carried to medical, through sections where emergency lighting painted everything in hellish red, until they burst through the doors of the Combat Information Center. The room fell silent. 50 personnel, from the Admiral down to the most junior radar operator, all turned to stare at the small woman in the torn uniform, whose exposed tattoo declared her something that seemed impossible. Captain Arthur Stone stood near the tactical display, and his face transformed from confusion to recognition to something approaching relief. "Commander Whitmore, your assessment was correct about all of it." "Thank you, Captain." Ivy moved to the primary tactical station, her eyes scanning the displays with the speed of someone who'd spent years reading battlefield geometry. "Admiral, permission to coordinate defensive operations?" Bradley stood at the command station, and for the first time since this crisis began, he looked his age. Every one of his 55 years pressed down on him like physical weight. He looked at Ivy, at her scars, at her tattoo, at the absolute confidence in her bearing. "Granted," he said quietly. "The ship is yours, Commander." What happened next would be analyzed in Naval War College classrooms for the next decade. Ivy Whitmore took tactical command of a carrier strike group under active attack and demonstrated why the Pentagon considered her one of the most gifted combat commanders in special operations. She spoke in short, precise bursts, coordinating 5 ships and 20 aircraft across 3-dimensional battle space, anticipating enemy movements before they happened, positioning assets with the efficiency of someone playing chess, several moves ahead. When the enemy submarine launched torpedoes exactly when and where she'd predicted, the Montana was already in position to intercept. When the secondary air attack developed, defensive fighters were waiting at optimal altitude. Within 20 minutes, the attack was over. Enemy aircraft driven off or destroyed. Submarines forced to retreat or neutralized. The carrier strike group battered but intact. Casualties minimized through proper defensive posture and coordinated response. And standing in the center of the Combat Information Center, a 5'3" woman whose torn uniform exposed the scars and symbols that told everyone exactly who she'd been all along. The immediate crisis resolved. Attention turned to consequences. Admiral Bradley stood near the command station, his face ashen, as Commander Audrey Foster's voice came through on the secure satellite link from Pearl Harbor. "Admiral Bradley, this is Commander Foster, Strike Group Intelligence Director. I'm required to inform you that Commander Whitmore was operating under direct authority from the Secretary of the Navy to assess your fitness for continued command. That assessment is now complete." A pause. "Sir, based on patterns observed during this operation, I'm authorized to recommend your immediate relief pending formal inquiry." Bradley said nothing. What could he say? The evidence was overwhelming. The mission recording systems had documented everything. His dismissal of accurate intelligence, his retaliation against a subordinate who'd challenged him, his creation of a command environment where ego superseded mission effectiveness. "Admiral," Foster continued, her voice not unkind, "Commander Hayes will assume tactical command of the strike group effective immediately. You're confined to quarters pending investigation. Do you understand?" "I understand." Bradley's voice was barely audible. He looked at Ivy, opened his mouth as if to speak, then simply shook his head and walked toward the exit. 2 Marines fell in beside him, not quite an arrest, but not quite not an arrest either. As he passed Ivy, he stopped. "I didn't know." "That's not an excuse, sir. You should have known because you should have listened, but you assumed competence was linked to rank and appearance instead of demonstrated capability." Ivy's voice held no triumph, no satisfaction, just sad certainty. "How many others have you dismissed over 30 years? How many accurate assessments ignored? How many careers damaged because someone didn't fit your assumption was about what expertise looks like?" Bradley had no answer. He walked away, and with him went 3 decades of service ending not in glory, but in a lesson learned far too late. Transitioning from classified military operations to civilian leadership positions requires more than just experience. It requires credentials that translate. Advanced executive education programs specifically designed for special operations, veterans offer accelerated MBA pathways with security clearance-compatible coursework. Legal consultation services specializing in military contract disputes, security clearance issues, and veteran employment rights provide 24/7 support from attorneys who understand operational security requirements. These programs recognize that your real-world experience leading high-stakes missions is worth more than traditional academic prerequisites. This story ends with one of the most satisfying conclusions you'll ever see. But there's another mission waiting, another quiet professional operating in the shadows, facing impossible odds. Click the video appearing in the top right corner to see what happens when a single operator faces an entire battalion. You won't believe how it ends. The consequences cascaded through the carrier like a wave breaking against a seawall, immediate, thorough, and transformative. Commander Derek Nash was placed under arrest within the hour. Assault on a superior officer, unlawful detention, obstruction of justice. The Marine Guard who escorted him away was Corporal Morrison, the same young man who'd been assigned to guard Ivy. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. As Nash passed Lieutenant Commander Charlotte Pierce in the corridor, she shrank against the bulkhead, her face pale with the knowledge that her own reckoning was coming. It arrived 15 minutes later in the form of 2 JAG officers and a security detail. Lieutenant Commander Pierce, your security clearance is suspended, effective immediately pending investigation into conduct unbecoming an officer. You're being transferred off this carrier for formal inquiry. Charlotte's carefully constructed professional facade crumbled. I didn't know. She didn't tell us she was... The fact that you didn't know is precisely the problem, ma'am, the senior JAG officer replied. You made assumptions based on appearance and rank rather than evaluating actual competence. That's not an excuse. That's the crime. She was escorted to the same helicopter that had been prepared for Ivy's evacuation, the poetic justice making several sailors smile grimly as they watched her departure. Chief Petty Officer Raymond Cole lasted slightly longer, until Master Chief Kane personally stripped him of his rank insignia in front of the assembled chief's mess. You abused your position to humiliate someone you perceived as weak, Kane said, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of service. That's not leadership, that's bullying. And in my Navy, we don't tolerate bullies. You're finished, Cole, not just on this ship, everywhere. Cole's face crumpled. His son was a SEAL candidate, scheduled to start training in 3 months. The boy had grown up wanting to serve like his father. Now his father would be known as the chief who'd abused a DEVGRU commander. Some stains didn't wash out. Lieutenant Flynn Dalton wasn't arrested, but his punishment might have been worse. He was grounded, not officially, but through the quiet understanding that squadron commanders reached when one of their pilots demonstrated such catastrophically poor judgment that no one wanted them in the air until extensive retraining could occur. His squadron mates treated him with the distant courtesy reserved for people who'd betrayed the tribe's core values. And every time he walked past the flight deck, he saw Ivy coordinating operations with Captain Stone, demonstrating tactical knowledge that made his 8 years of experience look like a child's understanding of an adult's job. But the consequences extended beyond punishments. Rewards came too, distributed with the same systematic thoroughness. Commander Owen Hayes received immediate notification of his selection to Admiral, the youngest officer in recent memory to make that rank. His willingness to challenge Bradley's decisions, his protection of Ivy despite personal risk, his navigation of impossible ethical waters, all noted, all rewarded. Lieutenant Fiona Cross received a Navy Commendation Medal and selection for Special Operations Intelligence Training. Her persistence in investigating despite firewalls and obstacles marked her as exactly the kind of officer the Navy needed more of. Master Chief Kane got the call he had been hoping for, but never expected. Command Master Chief of Naval Special Warfare. His recognition of Ivy before anyone else, his willingness to trust his instincts over rank structure, made him the right choice to help rebuild a culture that had momentarily forgotten what real leadership looked like. Captain Arthur Stone was selected for Rear Admiral Lower Half. His willingness to challenge Bradley cited explicitly in the promotion paperwork. Speaking truth to power was supposed to be career suicide. Instead, it had proven to be career elevation when that truth was backed by demonstrated competence. The cultural shift happened more subtly, but perhaps more importantly. That evening, the mess deck atmosphere transformed. Analysts and junior officers who'd been dismissed or overlooked suddenly found senior personnel treating them with a respect that felt new and uncomfortable and right. Seaman recruit Lily Morgan sat at her usual table, but now Senior Chief Martha Reed sat across from her, asking about her goals and aspirations. When Lily mentioned wanting to try for SEAL training, Reed nodded seriously. You've got the right inspiration. Commander Whitmore is proof that capability doesn't have a size requirement or a gender limitation, just a willingness to be better than you think you can be. Lily's SEAL training application was submitted that night. Ivy would write the recommendation letter personally, brief, professional, devastatingly effective. Petty Officer Connor Shaw, the sonar tech Ivy had helped with signal processing weeks earlier, received an accelerated promotion to Petty Officer First Class. His defense of her character, when everyone else was piling on mockery, was noted. Loyalty to competence over popularity was a trait the Navy valued more than most people realized. The institutional changes happened at the Pentagon level. Within 48 hours of the incident, the Secretary of the Navy issued a fleet-wide directive establishing the Command Climate Assessment Program. Undercover evaluations, now standard procedure for flag officers whose judgment appeared compromised. A new regulation required formal review processes before dismissing intelligence assessments, protecting analysts from retaliatory commanders who couldn't handle being challenged. And in an unprecedented move, the Naval War College announced a new case study, the USS Roosevelt Incident, Leadership Failure Analysis. It would be required reading for every officer attending command training. The lesson was simple: check your ego, trust your people, and never assume competence correlates with your preconceptions. Admiral Bradley's name was quietly removed from a building at the Naval Academy scheduled to be named in his honor. In its place, Whitmore Hall. The irony was intentional, the message clear. 2 days after the attack, with the carrier strike group relocated to safer waters and repairs underway, a formal ceremony was held on the flight deck. The entire crew assembled, thousands of personnel in formation, to witness what should have been a commendation ceremony but felt more like an apology. Rear Admiral Foster attended virtually, her face on a large screen erected for the occasion. In her hands, a medal case. Commander Ivy Whitmore, for exceptional leadership under extreme duress, tactical excellence preventing carrier group casualties, and service above and beyond the call of duty, you are hereby awarded the Distinguished Service Medal. The crew erupted in applause. Ivy stood at attention, uncomfortable with recognition, in a way that combat veterans often were. She'd done her job. That's how she saw it. The medal felt like acknowledgement of something that shouldn't need acknowledging. But she accepted it gracefully, because refusing would insult everyone who'd been saved by her decisions. After the ceremony, Commander Hayes approached her privately. "Pentagon wants you for Strike Group Commander. You'd have your own carrier, full task force. It's a career maker, Ivy." She shook her head slowly. "My place is with my team, sir. The SEALs. The SEALs." Hayes smiled. "I figured you'd say that. For what it's worth, I think they're lucky to have you. And I'm sorry, for all of it, for not seeing what was right in front of us. You saw it faster than most. And you made the right call when it mattered. That's all anyone can ask." Master Chief Kane organized a send-off that occupied the entire flight deck. Hundreds of sailors lined up in formation, their positioning spelling out words visible from above. Ghost Actual. The aerial photo would circulate through naval intelligence communities for months, becoming a minor legend. Ivy walked through the corridor of saluting sailors, each one holding their position with parade ground perfection. She stopped at various points, exchanging brief words with people who'd mattered during the assessment. To Lily Morgan, "Stay focused. The training will be harder than you can imagine, but you've got what it takes." To Connor Shaw, "Keep trusting your instincts. The Navy needs people who see past rank to capability." To Lieutenant Ethan Wells, the junior analyst who had learned humility, "Everything I taught you this week wasn't really about tactical analysis. It was about how you treat people when you think they're beneath you. You passed. Don't forget the lesson." She reached the edge of the flight deck where a rigid hull inflatable boat waited to ferry her to the Montana. Captain Ronan Blake stood at the boat's controls, grinning. "Time to come home, Commander. Your team's waiting." But before boarding, Ivy turned to the assembled crew one final time. Thousands of eyes watched her, waiting. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone," she said, her voice amplified by portable speakers. "I came because the Pentagon had concerns about this command environment. Those concerns proved valid, but the solution isn't about punishment, it's about growth. Every person on this ship has potential. Don't let anyone tell you your worth is determined by your rank, your appearance, or their assumptions. Prove your value through competence. Defend your ideas with evidence, and treat everyone with respect, because you never know who they might actually be." She paused, scanning faces. Service doesn't seek recognition, It seeks mission success. Remember that. She descended into the crib. The crew pulled her aboard, and the boat accelerated toward the Montana, which had surfaced a quarter-mile away. As she approached the submarine, its crew lined up on deck, all at attention, all saluting as she came alongside. The boarding process was efficient, familiar. She'd done this hundreds of times in dozens of operations. But as her boots hit the Montana's deck, Master Chief Kane's voice carried across the water one final time, speaking into a microphone on the Roosevelt's deck. "Welcome home, Commander. Fair winds and following seas." Ivy rendered one final salute to the carrier, sharp and perfect. Then she descended through the sail hatch into the submarine's interior, leaving the world of aircraft carriers and formal ceremonies for the silent world of special operations, where her real work waited. The Montana submerged smoothly, the ocean swallowing it without trace. On the carrier, sailors began breaking formation, returning to their duties, already beginning to process what they'd witnessed into the stories they'd tell for the rest of their careers. Commander Hayes stood on the flight deck long after everyone else had dispersed, watching the empty water where the submarine had vanished. Lieutenant Fiona Cross joined him, holding a tablet. "Sir, I've been analyzing her assessment reports, the ones she wrote before we knew who she was. Every single tactical recommendation was correct. Every concern about the Admiral's judgment was validated. She knew exactly what was going to happen and tried to warn us. And we imprisoned her for it," Hayes said quietly. "The irony is, that was part of the test too. Bradley didn't fail because he disagreed with her. He failed because he couldn't imagine being wrong. Do you think we learned anything?" Hayes looked at her. "Ask me in 6 months when the next crisis hits and we have to decide whether to trust the quiet voice in the back of the room or the loud voice at the front. That's when we'll know if the lesson stuck." Inside the Montana, Ivy sat in the submarine's small conference room, her SEAL team assembled around her. 12 operators, CISOs, each one with similar stories of impossible missions and survived crises. Each one looking at their commander with the complicated affection that special operations teams develop when they've kept each other alive through situations that should have killed them all. So, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, not to be confused with the fighter pilot of the same name, leaned back in his chair with a grin. "How'd it go? Did you enjoy playing civilian?" "Worst cover assignment ever," Ivy replied, but she smiled. "Give me a hot desert insertion any day over trying to act helpless while people mock me. Could have just revealed yourself immediately, saved everyone the drama. Drama was the point. Pentagon needed to see how deep the problems went. If I'd revealed myself early, Bradley would have course-corrected temporarily. This way, we saw his real character." Captain Blake entered, carrying a tablet. His expression suggested the brief levity was ending. "Commander, this came through while we were surfacing. Encrypted, priority 1, SC SNAV authorization." Ivy took the tablet, her team watching as her eyes scanned the text. They saw her jaw tighten fractionally. The only tell that whatever she was reading was serious. "New mission?" Webb asked. "New mission," Ivy confirmed. She pulled up an image on the screen, an abandoned facility, Middle Eastern architecture, something wrong with the shadow angles that suggested photo manipulation or something worse. 47 hostages, facility supposedly abandoned for 3 years, but clearly operational, ghost signatures all over the intelligence. Ghost signatures? Another SEAL, Petty Officer Aiden Cross, frowned. Like what? Like someone very skilled is running the operation. Someone who knows how we think. Someone who might have trained the way we trained. Ivy pulled up a second image, a grainy photograph of a hostile commander, partial face visible, wearing gear that looked disturbingly familiar. "That patch. Look at it." They looked. The patch was close to DEVGRU standard, but modified, altered. Like someone had taken official insignia and perverted it. "Former operator?" Blake suggested quietly. "That's what I'm thinking, which means everything we know, they know. Every tactic we use, they can counter. Every move we make, they'll anticipate." Webb looked at the mission parameters displayed on the screen. Survival probability, 34%. That's optimistic? "That's assuming a standard assault with standard tactics," Ivy replied, "which we won't be using. Because if they expect us to fight like SEALs, we're going to fight like something they've never seen before." Her team exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication that developed through years of shared danger. They'd followed Ivy through worse odds than this. Through missions that intelligence rated at 15% survival probability, through situations where the smart play was to abort and the only play that worked was to push forward anyway. She'd brought them all home every time, not unscathed. The scars they all carried testified to that. But alive, functional, still capable of the next mission. "Gear up," Ivy said quietly. "We leave in 6 hours." "Commander," one of the newer team members, Petty Officer Jack Forrester, only 3 operations with the team, spoke up hesitantly. "The probability rating—" "I've beaten worse odds before," Ivy interrupted, but not unkindly. "Besides, they're not expecting ghosts to be real." She closed the tablet, but her mind was already running through scenarios, calculating probabilities, planning the impossible. 47 hostages, unknown enemy capabilities, a facility that shouldn't exist being run by operators who shouldn't have gone rogue, and 6 hours to plan a mission that would either save innocent lives or prove that even DEVGRU commanders had limits to what they could accomplish. "But Blake," she said, looking at the Montana's captain, "get me everything intelligence has on this facility. Building layouts, guard rotation estimates, satellite thermal imaging. I want to know which shadows are real and which ones are camouflage. Already pulling it. Should have comprehensive package in 2 hours." "Good." Ivy stood, her team rising with her in an unconscious synchronization. "Because 47 people are counting on us to be smarter, faster, and more adaptable than whoever's holding them. And I don't know about you, but I'm not interested in disappointing them." Her team nodded. They'd heard variations of this speech before every mission. The specifics changed, but the core remained constant. People needed saving, odds were terrible, and they were going to do it anyway because that's what they did. That's who they were. The mission clock started its countdown. 5 hours, 47 minutes, 23 seconds, 22 seconds, 21 seconds. The Montana turned toward open ocean, running silent and deep, carrying ghosts who were about to prove they were very, very real.